In 1999, Sega launched what would be their last, and in my opinion, best game console, the Sega Dreamcast. Coming out just 10 years after the rapidly successful Sega Genesis, this console was an evolutionary leap above the competition. Now sure, the Nintendo 64 brought Super Mario, which put 3D worlds to our television, but the Dreamcast brought those worlds to life with character, style, and innovations never seen outside of amusement park and high-end arcades. Almost 25 years later, the Dreamcast still sits in my top 5 video game consoles of all time. So it's almost a crime to know that I may have had a hand in killing it. So 1997 was a high point for video games. Some of the biggest and most memorable games and IPs released in this year, including Final Fantasy VII, GoldenEye, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Diablo, Gran Turismo, among lesser played but no less awesome games such as Mega Man Legends, Diddy Kong Racing, Bushido Blade, Colony Wars, Einhander, NFL Game Day 98, Blast Corps. You get the idea. A little something for everyone, you might say. A golden era for game companies. Well, except for one. You see, in 1997, Sega had some incredible games released as well. You had Saturn Bomberman, Thunder Force 5, World Series Baseball 98, Shining Force 3, Marvel vs. Street Fighter, and my personal favorite, NHL Power Play. It was a good game. It's seriously the best hockey game up until Dreamcast 2K2. Anyways, the Saturn was having trouble gaining any traction against their Sony and Nintendo counterpart. The problems for Sega weren't in their games, but nearly everything else. You see, Sega had some internal problems caused by their explosive growth during the Genesis era. They had headquarters all over the place, who each had a different idea, not only for the direction of the company, but on individual IPs as well. Properties like Sonic the Hedgehog were thriving in America and in the UK, which should be awesome news, right? Well, according to John Szczepaniak's Untold History of Japanese Game Developers, then president of Sega, Hayao Nakayama, would berate everyone on a weekly basis, pounding the table and calling everyone in the room stupid and worthless for losing to the US and UK markets in terms of sales. That doesn't foster an environment where you'd want to go and support other teams outside your own territory. But that was only one of many problems Sega had to deal with, as there were disagreements on pretty much everything. In the year of our Jurassic Park, Sega of America worked to broker a deal with Silicon Graphics, whose workstations were powering some of the greatest special effects of the time. Sega of Japan rejected that proposal, and Silicon Graphics wound up collaborating with another game company on their system, which would release 2-something years later. I can't remember what it was called. Remember how people say Nintendo was responsible for Sony getting into games because the CD-ROM add-on for the Nintendo 64 was made by Sony? Years before that, president of Sega, Tom Kalinske, I guess is his name, was in talks with Sony of America to produce a joint hardware platform, producing like 2 and 3D visuals years before Nintendo was presented with the CD add-on idea. And Sega of Japan passed on that as well. So, there are some internal problems at Sega. I mean, come on. I mean, every international company deals with this stuff, right? There has to be more to the story. Well, I'm getting there, Mr. or Mrs. Bossy Pants. You see, not only was Sega not choosing to work with other companies, they were releasing add-ons for the existing Sega Genesis that were absolutely bonkers by any standards, by today's or yesterday's. To extend the life of the Genesis, Sega began working on add-ons to the system that would make use of more storage or better processing capabilities.
Sounds like a good idea.
In 1992, Sega released their 300 So in 1992, Sega released a $300 Sega CD add-on, which played music CDs and also FMB games like Sewer Shark, Mad Dog McCree, and Night Trap. Two years after that, Sega developed the 32X, which is an add-on for $160. This was the gateway to the Sega Saturn. The 32X would plug into the cartridge slot and had architecture on the inside that was sort of like a Sega Saturn. And it would allow your Sega Genesis to play slightly more graphic-intensive games, which were limited and $10 to $20 more expensive. I think I need to change the air conditioner filters because I can't stop coughing through this whole thing. So where were we? When Tom Kalinske takes the stage at the very first E3 Expo in May of 1995, Sega already has 6 incompatible game platforms on the market. They have the Genesis, they have the Game Gear, they have the Pico, the Sega CD, 32X, and the, hey wait, is the 32X CD, is that a thing? It is. And that's not even including Latin and South American markets that are behind, that are still actively selling and supporting the Sega Master System. So everyone expects Tom Kalinske, again, I'm going to get that wrong every time, to talk about the price of the system, as Sega had already set the release date for the Sega Saturn as Saturn Day, which was September 2nd, but they had already announced that. So now what everybody was waiting for is the price. So what happens instead is one of the biggest mistakes in gaming history.
And since I began my remarks with an announcement, I may as well finish with another. We started our rollout of Sega Saturn yesterday. We're at retail today in 1,800 Toys R Us, software, etc., and electronic boutique stores around the U.S. and Canada. Our retail price is between $399 and $449. But we're starting today in store. Sega Saturn is not only here now, it's out there. Thanks.
Sega announces the game system is available for purchase now. So now everybody's upset. Sega of America is upset because Sega of America thought September 2nd was already too soon. They wanted to push that out. Developers are upset because not only were they fighting an inferior motherboard that Sega Japan landed on, where it's like 2 distinct processors across the board. It's not an easy system to program for. Now they have to get their games done faster with less quality control. Retailers are angry that they couldn't promote and allocate shelf space to a console they had to keep quiet about until after a show that at this point nobody knew about. Like, nobody outside the gaming industry knew what E3 was about. Lastly, the press who were sitting there in the seats covering the event were upset as they had little to no launch coverage for the system that would likely be coming now 2 magazine cycles back from when it got to publication. The challenge is the people sitting there, they could put something to print, but that's the magazine, that's the issue of the magazine dedicated to the show. They can't do a rollout for a console at the same time, unless it's going to print a magazine 200 pages thick. So everybody's upset. The Gaming Historian actually has a great video on this, which breaks down exactly what happened. I recommend watching it, but man alive, it was a freaking train wreck. It was said that Sega was trying to beat Sony to the market because Sony was going to announce their PlayStation price and date at the show. But there was also some rumors around that Sega wanted to beat Nintendo, as that rivalry was much more contentious. And the biggest irony, Nintendo wound up having to delay the release of the Nintendo 64 until 1996, which, if the rumors are true that Sega wanted to beat Nintendo, this would be the biggest revenge miscalculation of all time. Over the next few years, from 95, 96, 97, Sega would continue to free fall through price drops, pack-ins, and executive leadership. Seriously, their stock mirrored that of Umbrellas at the beginning of RE4. In an effort to save both their plummeting stock prices, Sega attempted to merge at this time with Japanese toy maker Bandai in a billion-dollar stock swap. However, when Bandai's executive team shot that deal down, both the presidents of Bandai and Sega resigned. Which allowed former Sony Computer Entertainment of America employee Bernie Stolar to take over as CEO of Sega in 1998. Now, at this point, you're like, Sega's doing a pretty good job of destroying itself all on its own, doesn't it? Well, yes, they're in some pretty deep water at this point, and their financial collapse was imminent. But not so fast! While Sega's home consumer video game revenues were in the tank, Sega's arcade revenues were increasing year on year during the late 90s. Due to Sega's Model 2 and Model 3 arcade systems and games like Virtual Fighter, Daytona, House of the Dead, and again, my personal favorite, Virtual On, Sega actually showed total revenue and profit increase in 1997. So I know what you're all asking. What am I doing all this time? Well, I'm glad you asked. So after losing my internship due to a board takeover at EA where the board ousted Trip Hawkins, I opted to move to the West Coast anyhow, where I landed in Seattle, where I ultimately was rejected at the holy trinity of gaming. At the time, I was rejected from Nintendo, Squaresoft, and DMA Design, which is Rockstar Games. You see, when I graduated with a degree in 2D animation from Edinburgh University in 1993, I moved west to get a job in the games industry. Unfortunately, there was a little movie that released in the same year, which you may or may not have heard of, called Jurassic Park. I think it had Pauly Shore in it.
Obviously, right?
Every interview I hit liked my digital portfolio, you see, because I had one. Because I created on the Commodore Amiga, you see. But everyone would invariably ask the same question. Do you do 3D? I had a choice of either going back to school to learn 3D or find a company that was still hiring 2D artists. So I was off to Portland, Oregon, where I found work at a children's software company known as Image Builder, working on titles that some of you may have actually played, including Disney's Magic Artist, Madeline's Learning Adventures, Microsoft Tutor, and Shrek's Swamp Fun Math Adventures.
Regardless of which topics Shrek might theoretically understand, early math doesn't seem like it's one of them.
Alright, when this is over, I'm going to replace all of these. Anyways, working at a children's software company while all this is happening, and I take a job at Electronics Boutique on Sundays. Why would I take a job when I already have a job in the industry? Well, because I'm a complete nerd, you see, and I realized that I could hang out in a game store on Sunday, which I was doing anyway, talk about games all day, and make enough extra money to buy one game per week. People would pay me to talk about games with them, so I did this happily for many weeks. So one night I'm working, a middle-aged man comes in and asks if I like games. We talk for 30 minutes in the store, and then he asks if he can buy me dinner. He then flies me to his fortress of solitude, where he treats me like I've always wanted. No, that's not what happened. Time out. That's not what... Anyways, in the end, I stopped working at Image Builder Software in 1998 and became the buyer for all Game Crazy stores in 1999. For those that don't remember, Game Crazy was a store within a store, a concept made by Hollywood Video. Hollywood Video had more than 2,500 stores at their peak, and were looking to put a Game Crazy store inside each and every one of them. If you were lucky enough to be in one of the 725 stores that we eventually had Game Crazies in, you'll know how cool these places were. So, here's where Sega and I cross paths and how things begin to fall completely off the rails for both of us. In 1999, Hollywood Video strikes a deal with Sega of America to launch the Sega Dreamcast in the United States. This isn't an unusual tactic, as Sega had already done this before in 1992 with the launch of the Sega CD and Blockbuster Video. Apparently, full motion video was going to be big for the rental market.
The sharks didn't stop them. They'll be coming for me now.
Gee, you're cute!
Oh my, let's do that again.
Anyways, Sega did promotional deals like this all the time with Toys R Us, KB Toys, to use the store footprint as a marketing hub for their upcoming releases. In fact, most manufacturers to this day have similar co-op deals with stores for signage, placement, and joint advertising. If you see a poster in a window and wonder why that's there for 6 months, or if you see a counter talker or counter tag that you've seen over and over again, it's because somebody likely paid to have that real estate at the store. So how this Sega Dreamcast promo worked is that Hollywood Video would have Sega Dreamcast available in the summer of 1999, which would allow customers to get their hands on this game system before it was available to purchase. Customers would rent the Sega Dreamcast with 2 controllers and a copy of Sonic Adventure, Ready to Rumble, eventually NFL 2K for 2 nights for $19.99. I mean, low price in terms of bragging rights. The deal with Sega was a revenue share agreement in which Sega would provide consoles, games, and all of the logistics in getting the Sega Dreamcast to the distribution center. From there, our distribution center would set these units up, assign them SKUs, security tags, and put them into rental cases before shipping them off to stores. So before all of this could start, I had to generate the first purchase order, my very first purchase order. Now keep in mind, leading up to this point, I was an animator at a children's software company. Also keep in mind that I was hired by somebody who found me working in the mall. Also, this is what I looked like in 1999. So imagine giving that guy the power to write a purchase order in the amount of $6 million. While all that's happening, things at Sega in Japan weren't improving on the international relations front. Fights were erupting around the launch of the Dreamcast right up until the launch. Things got worse when EA formally announced that it would not develop games for the platform before, get this, they wanted a deal to be the only sports provider for the platform. A kind of exclusivity agreement. A license where you could only have sports games on your console if they were made by Electronic Arts. Exclusivity in sports.
Next auction, Madden NFL 2006. Now, they're calling this a blight on the video game industry.
Oh yeah, EA has always been terrible. Add to that the new Sega of America CEO Bernie Stolar, a man that had experience working for Atari, Sony, and the arcade industry, had to fight his own company on every decision. Price it at $199? Fight. Want to include a modem with the system? Fight. Want to bring visual concepts in to develop the greatest sports franchise known to mankind? Fight. Want to fight? Let's fight. Now imagine you're Bernie Stolar and you're taking hit after hit and fighting for the most basic of requests while rolling out the most advanced gaming platform to this day. While all this is going on, you hear one of your key partners in the US has just refused to pay the first installment on a revenue share, citing, Sega has not held up their end of the bargain, so we're not paying until we recoup our costs in this promotion, if at all. They didn't write that. They said that. This is a Tekken poster from Also Game Crazy. So why did we do that? Why did Hollywood Video walk out on the check? We didn't steal it. We were going to pay them back when we felt like it. Because we're so big, because we're so tough? No. Hollywood Video did that because they nearly bankrupted themselves in 1999. Not trying to build out game stores, not by cutting $6 million POs for this guy, not because people rose up in solidarity against a late fees burning their corporate offices to the ground. No, not that simple. You see, what happened is Hollywood Video spent $1 bajillion on a .com out of California known as Real.com, where they tried to compete against other retailers in the online days. How did they compete? Well, they offered the lowest price on the hottest movies like Titanic. In fact, you could get a copy of Titanic from Real.com for $12 on VHS. In a world of $24.99 videotapes, that's the best deal around. Only problem is we were buying those movies for Real.com at between $18 and $19 each, and then reselling them for $12 so that we could remain competitive. The bleeding wasn't stopped until a $96 million leg was amputated. Bottom line, things got pretty bad for Sega that even their partners were becoming adversaries. And with all of this, in the first week of August 1999, just 3 weeks prior to the Dreamcast launch, Stolar throws in the towel at Sega and resigns. Now, I'm not saying that I'm directly responsible for the CEO of Sega of America leaving, but I'm sure it had a lot to do with him having enough of this crap. Like, every day you go into Japan, which we showed in the Sega Saturn days, there was adversarial relationships between US, UK, and Japanese markets because the Japanese middle management was getting browbeat all day. Well, now you have the same thing happening where Sega of America is getting browbeat every day. That nature was toxic at Sega at this point. You had a lot of great games, a lot of great developers, a lot of great technology in the M1 and M2 boards. The problem is there's just so much baggage attached to what happened during the big growth of Sega Genesis and the failure of the Sega Saturn, that the Dreamcast was a great last hurrah, a phenomenal system. One of the top 5 best gaming systems in my lifetime. So good, I will tell you, the system was, that it was repackaged years later by a company called Nintendo and called the Wii. The Wii is effectively the Dreamcast Lite. So if you were to make a game that is appealing to multiple audiences, whether it be Samba de Amigo or Space Channel 5, you have it open, you have Maraca controllers, you have several different ways of interfacing with the system. You've got arcade type titles like Choo Choo Rocket. You've got fighting games, some of the best on the system. You've got 3D arena fighters like Power Stone, which are still absolutely unmatched to this day, how good those games were. You've got some of the best arcade iterations of not only Virtual Fighter, but you also have Soul Calibur, which the game still, to this day, looks absolutely phenomenal. It's 22 years later. You can put that game on, and it still looks gorgeous. The Wii will not have that luxury, but the Wii did a really good job of appealing to a much broader market, and that's kind of what was happening with Sega. I will say they pushed that launch of the Sega Saturn out a little bit. Maybe everything gets better. If they had reduced the price of it down $100, maybe things would be better. End of the day, it sounded like they had too many headquarters, too many heads at the top, and nobody was getting along. So it's a shame, because as consoles grow and evolve, and the games should do that with them. And I think the loss of Sega was a bigger blow to the industry's creativity than most people would like to admit. So I really, really hope that I can make it back up to the gaming industry. I did not mean to work for the company. I did not mean to promise $6 million in return or revenue share on $15 million and not pay it. That was out of my pay grade. I did everything I could. But the epilogue to this story is one of my favorite of all time, because we gave Sega the middle finger at a corporate level. Not me. The corporate people that would pay bills. Sega would not send us any additional Sega software. So we had to fulfill, on launch day, $99.99, we had to fulfill 270 Dreamcast pre-orders. How do you do it? Well, our distributors at the time did not have any. We wound up having to go to all the retailers. We went to Fred Meyer, we went to Target, we went to Best Buy. I don't know if We went to we went everywhere. And we sent people out with their own credit cards or with corporate credit cards to effectively go clean those stores out. But the funniest was I got to the second Fred Meyer and I went to the place, and we were doing this all first thing in the morning, got to the game section and they're all gone. So I look over and there's a person there with a shopping cart with all 8 in them. And they're at the register and they're from a competing game store, not ours, but another store. And they were writing a check for, and the Fred Meyer guy's like, we don't take checks. The guy leaves to go to his car. I'm like, you guys take credit cards? He's like, yeah. Rings all the things up because they don't ring SKUs up at the time. They just rang the things up. I just bought it and go out the opposite exit. And I'm putting them in the car like I'm bugging out of Vietnam. Like throwing them in there in my car. So I get the last one in. I turn the cart around and I push it towards the cart return. I don't even get it in the cart return, but I was like, because the guy's coming out of the store. Like, he's like, where's all my stuff? Wound up getting a total of 37 units and fulfilling the pre-orders at our store, securing that we would not just take your pre-order money and then not deliver. Because we had games. The games came from our distributors. We just had no Dreamcast units. So, again, I think we damaged Sega in that process. I know it's only $15 million, and when you're talking about these gigantic billion-dollar corporations, you're like, that $15 million here, $6 million there, it doesn't make a difference. I'm sure it had to do with more like, I'm tired of dealing with all these people. And I'm sorry. If I had anything to do with the death of Dreamcast, I need to know what penance I should have. Let me know what I can do to give back to the gaming industry in more ways than I already have. I'd be more than happy to take a look and see if there's anything I can do, anything I can improve with the contacts that I have. Again, thank you all for sitting through this whole thing, this lesson in history, and how I played a very small, infinitesimal part in the cosmic horror show that is video game rental and sales. So I just finished editing the Dreamcast video, and I realized that I had no end slate. So thank you for sitting through this. I really appreciate you watching this. I wanted to get the story out. I've been working on collecting this stuff all summer, so thank you. Thank you so much for making it to the end. You can do the normal stuff like and subscribe. You can share this stuff out there. I really kind of want to grow into the retro gaming community a little bit more, just with the stuff that I have and the stuff that I'm doing. So yeah, feel free to connect any way you want. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, on the TikToks. But yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for staying in gaming and being a gamer and or just liking game content. I really appreciate everybody for watching. Have a great rest of your Dreamcast launch day. And I'll see you all maybe in the afternoon.